Why do we feel the need to give to people who've given to us? Let me share with you an example of what I have in my mind, at least. We've had several people in our home. We enjoy. Ashley loves to cook. She loves to have people in. And so when we have folks over, I don't know if that's just a regional thing or if that actually happens across the map, but people tend to bring like little bags of gifts. They're never for me. They're always for her. So I'm not jealous, but they'll bring like a little candle, or they'll bring something that they say, oh, well, here you go. We wanted to bring this. Or you get invited to someone's house, and you're invited over for dinner, and what's the first question you ask? What can I bring, or may I bring something? So we have this idea that when someone gives to us or they do something, there's this unspoken expectation that I'm going to do something in return. Or let's paint the picture this way. Someone's given you something. They gave you something that's really nice. And what's all of a sudden you're feeling? What do you all of a sudden then have within you? I got to think of something to give them back. And it has to be just as thoughtful, just as expensive. It's got to be the perfect gift to give back. And so it's like, well, if you got me a $20 gift card, well, all of a sudden now I feel like I got to get you a $20 or $25 gift card. And so I realized that in this, no, by the way, I don't give higher than what you give, so just go ahead and know. Whatever gift card you give, But why do we feel the need to give to people who've given to us? Why is it that we can't just receive and be thankful for the gift? And I wonder how much of that is built in from our view of life, like this, almost like a balance. Like we have to be equal with other people, and so therefore, if you've given me something, then all of a sudden I owe you. So let's say one of your best friends, who's been a friend for a long time, they're a good friend, and you're moving, and they call you up, and they say, I'll be there, I'm moving. Oh, by the way, they show up at your house, and they realize that you don't have chairs for the tables that Russ is looking for, and they say, you know what, that's not a problem. They pull out their phone, 2 days later, Amazon delivers 6 chairs to their house. And they say, you know what, you mentioned not having a rug, and I think you need a rug in this living room, and by the way, you pick one out, and I'm going to buy it for you. And then, lo and behold, later on, they show up with another gift, and you're saying, man, what if someone in your life kept giving to you? And then one day they ask, they say, Miss Betty, I was at your house one time and there was a book on your bookshelf titled such and such. Can I borrow that book? What would your reaction be? Of course. Let's say they called you up and they said, okay, I really need help. I've got this table and it's just too big for myself. It's not overly heavy, but it's just awkward. And I just need a set of arms to help me guide it through to that next room. Could you come help me in the next few days? What would your answer be? Sure. I'll drop whatever I'm doing. How come? Because you care. First off, it's become an emotional thing. The friend started off as a good friend. There's already a relationship. But then if you add on to that the idea that we have this obligation to feel or to do things based upon other people's reaction, they have proven their friendship. They have proven their love by saying, look, whatever you need, it's yours. I'll give it to you. It's not a problem. I'm going to make it happen. And then when they ask for something very small, our reaction hopefully is, of course, it's yours. Whatever you need, you've got it. What if I told you that oftentimes our reaction is, I don't really know if I can let you borrow that book. I'm really busy. I can't help you move right now. How would you feel about that type of a friend? Sad? What other good emotional words would you use? Disappointed. Used. Got a lot from this side, no one from this side. Come on, sheep. Come. What was that? They took all my stuff and then they're not going to do anything for me in return. The balance is off. Unappreciative. Boy, if only they could return just the simple gesture. I question, and the reason I say I think that is more often the description for us, because when I come to Romans chapter 12, chapter 12 is the shift in the book of Romans. And by the way, this is our new series. We're going to spend time in Romans chapters 12 and 13 for about the next 6 weeks, I believe. And what the focus is going to be is looking back at the cross. We're going to look back at the cross of what Jesus did. And so at chapter 12, verse 1, that is the introduction. That's the shift in Romans. So far in Romans from 11 to chapter 1 to 11, has all been theology. It's been look at God, look at what He's done. It has been all focused on who God is. Chapter 12 is the shift because chapter 12 says, in light of what God has done, what do you do? We just spent a whole season in Matthew looking up to the cross. And since we have looked at the cross, now that we have seen the resurrection, and that was last week, that was Easter, what's your response to the resurrection, to the gospel? What's your response? And so Paul starts, and this is Romans chapter 12, verse 1, and as he starts off there, I'm going to say therefore, but that's not the first word. I'm going to kind of put it there. So the therefore is looking back. He's saying, look at what God has done. God has been the friend who showed up and helped you move. He's the friend who showed up and bought your rug. He bought your furniture. He showed up and He said, whatever you need for your house, I've got it. It's coming tomorrow. It's going to be there. And then He asks you for a simple thing. He says, I want you to live your life 100% dedicated to me. In the grand scheme of things, it's a very small request. And oftentimes, our comment to God is, I don't know if I can do that. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters. Notice Paul in this is not commanding. He could say, I command you, but he says, I appeal to you. I think some of your older translations would say, like, I beseech you. That's a word we don't use anymore. I can't tell you the last time I used the word beseech. But I could say I appeal. I could say I ask. I ask of you. I plead with you. I beg of you. Would you please? Paul's saying, would you please? By the mercies of God, by what all God's done. That's chapters 1 through 11, is all the mercy that God's shown. Now I want to ask you to start off with, I want you to think for a moment, what all has God done for you in your life? You don't have to list it. There's an old song, Count Your Many Blessings. Boy, angels will attend is one of the lines in that song. Because if I started counting the blessings that God has done for me. And then, on top of the physical blessings I have, let us never forget the spiritual blessing. We have forgotten the depravity of sin and the way that sin eats away at us. We have forgotten. And so Paul has reminded people in chapters 1 through 11 of what all God's done to save us. And so as he comes to chapter 12, he says, I beg of you, by the mercy of God, by all that God has done for you, present your bodies as a sacrifice. I'm going to change the verbiage here a little bit, and if you want, you can mark it in your own Bibles if you choose. I'm going to say that he says, present your bodies as a sacrifice, living, holy, and acceptable to God. If you want 3 subpoints, there's your 3 subpoints. Okay? This isn't a 3-point sermon. We're just going to talk. But if you want 3 points, there's your 3 points. Living, holy, and acceptable to God. I think we struggle with this idea, and I'm going to use a story that I've heard before, because how many of us are used to the topic of sacrifice? Now, first off, if I say sacrifice, most of us say that I didn't have a donut this morning. I sacrificed. You know, that is a big move for Josh to avoid the donut tray. I went with an egg. Instead, I sacrificed. You know, that's what we think of when sacrifice. When we think of sacrifice, I say, well, instead of getting the 8-ounce steak, I got the 6-ounce steak, which I don't know why you would do that change. You should go ahead and get the 12-ounce steak. But we would talk about how we've given up something for something that's happening in the future. And that's not what Paul's intention is here. Paul's intention is he's thinking back to a sacrifice in the long time ago, olden days, when they would take an animal. And so you're an Israelite, you're a Hebrew, and you would take an animal, depending upon your wealth, you would take an animal in to the priests, and the first thing the priests would do is they would slit its throat. They would catch the blood. Well, that's kind of graphic, but that's what would happen. And then they would take the blood, they would sprinkle it on the altar, and then they would start cutting the meat up, and they would throw the meat on the altar. And what you did as an individual for the forgiveness and the acknowledgement of what God has done is you would bring this animal to the altar, and you would watch it be given entirely to God. It was no longer yours. And by the way, they were always called to be the male without blemish. Well, I don't know how many of you know cattle very well or ranching very well, but you kind of want your boy animals around to make sure that your girl animals can keep having more babies. That's an important thing in ranching. And so what you're acknowledging in a sacrifice is you're saying, God, I am giving to you the future. I'm giving to you the trust that I would naturally have within myself, that somehow, even though I'm giving you the lineage, the ability to reproduce my herd and to make more, I'm trusting that you can do it, that you're going to provide for me. So when we say sacrifice, Paul's not talking about, I went without a donut this morning. Paul is talking about you giving up something that lends to a long-term future. Boy, we talk about sacrifice, and I think sometimes we fall short of the idea. I turned my thermostat up 2 degrees because they said it's going to save the planet. I've sacrificed. Boy, I've driven less. I've gone without a little bit. I gave up Coca-Cola because they said it's going to, rot my inside. I have done the sacrifice. And when Paul comes to the word sacrifice, he has something far greater. So my first question, the question that I've asked myself, I'm asking myself, is what have I truly sacrificed in the calling of Christ? I know from last week that Jesus gave up His own life for my benefit. I know that was the message of Passion Week. I know that that's what led us to the cross. And I know that even though we have the benefit of knowing the resurrection, He did all of that for me, for you. And so as I come to that, I realize what He sacrificed. And then I say, what have I sacrificed? I live in one of the greatest countries in the world, I believe. I have an immense amount of wealth compared to the majority of the world. I obviously haven't lost too many meals. What have I sacrificed? There's not a headhunter out looking for me because I'm out boldly preaching the gospel like there was for Paul and the other disciples. And then as I ask those questions of myself, I begin to realize I look just like the world. There ain't a lot different between me and them. I happen to be a morally good individual, so do a lot of people elsewhere. I happen to be somewhat right in the head. Well, so do a lot of other people. And so Paul says that first, you have to be the sacrifice. But it's not a sacrifice that says, okay, I'm going to die and I'm going to stay dead and I'm going to hide myself away. Paul says you have to be a living sacrifice. The joke I've always heard is the problem with a living sacrifice is it keeps crawling off the altar. And that's my problem too, is it not? Boy, I keep crawling off the altar. Lord, I'm going to sacrifice my mouth to you. I'm not going to say the words that I know I shouldn't say. I'm not going to say them there. I'm going to sacrifice my tongue to you. And then what happens whenever I get angry? Thank you. I was going to say it, but you beat me to it. Lord, I'm going to sacrifice my family to you. My family is going to be wholehearted, committed, devoted disciples of yours, and I want my family to know nothing but you and you crucified. And then what movies do I turn on in my living room? What TV shows do I entertain? What places do I want to go? Lord, I want to sacrifice my job to you. I want my witness in my workplace to be impeccable. I want everything about where I work, the people who I work with, I want them to know that you are my God. And then what happens? Boy, I show up to the workplace and guess what? Water cooler talk starts happening and I join right on in without dropping a beat. I am no different. Or catch this one. God, I want to give you my device. Where's my phone? Here's my phone. God, I want to give you this little device. I want everything that it does to be a praise and a glory to who you are. I am sacrificing my phone to you. And then I'm going to keep TikTok, and I'm going to keep Facebook, and I'm going to keep all the other stuff on there. And don't get me started, we could go down the line of social media. If I say I'm going to commit my social media to God, how many of us would change the things we post on social media? Meddling some. When Paul says sacrifice, you may have died, but you're called to live for something. You're not called to just shrink away and to never be seen. You're called to live for something. And so in this sacrificial language, there's the idea that I have to step forward into life and I have to be showing and modeling and living a life that God has called me to live. What's the life that Jesus modeled for us to live on the cross? And are we living that life? He says that you're to be a living sacrifice, a holy sacrifice. Can anyone define the word holy for me? Thank you very much. Set apart. I'm going to add a little bit more. That's the start of my perfect definition. Set apart by God for God. When He says that you're to be a holy sacrifice, everything about your life is to be completely committed to God. That means your home. Boy, I like a home. I feel comfortable in home. I'm a homebody. We go on a little trip somewhere, and after about 2 days, I want my bed and I want my home. I'm a homebody. But what if it's not my home? Let's speak spiritual for a moment. Is my home really my home? That structure, that brick, thank you, Betty. That structure, that brick house that I live in, it ain't my home. It's the temporary dwelling that I live in right now. If my life is supposed to be a true sacrifice, that home is to be nothing more than a glory and an honor to God. How much do we use our homes for the glory and the honor of God? I've said it before. How many of our neighbors know our God? And we don't have to be door knocking and evangelizing to them. They should know your God by the way that you live and the way that you keep your home and the way that you maintain and the way that you live among your neighbors. They should know who your God is because you should be radically different. If you're a living sacrifice, if you're a holy sacrifice. And He says that you're acceptable to God. Well, that's the tough one, is it not? How many of you, don't raise your hand, how many of you would say that you are acceptable to God? Like I said, I don't want you to raise your hands. But if that were the question, do you believe you're acceptable to God? That you would say yes. Now, for those of you who said no and you're to yourself, the challenge of being acceptable to God isn't on you. That's what chapters 1 through 11 is. The problem of acceptability is what God did. When God sent Jesus to the cross, He made you acceptable. The problem then becomes is, do you live your life in such a joy that it has been an acceptable journey? Are you living your life as if you're pleasing, as if you say, God, I am so thankful for all the things you've done for me, for all the ways that you've provided, that you've cared for, the ways you've tended to, the problems that you have solved. I am so thankful. And in a response to being thankful, like my good friend who helped me move, who bought all my stuff, I'm going to use Luke. Luke helped me move. He's a good friend. And I say, what can I do in response to what you've done for me? What can I? And it's not because I owe it to God. Does God need anything? Lyle, does God need a lampshade at His house? No. Is there anything you can think of that God needs? Does God even need you to do work? If God wanted to save everybody, He could do it Himself. He's capable of it. We believe in a God that does not need us. But He says, look, I've done all this for you. I want you to live your life in a response to what you have been blessed with. This is your spiritual worship. That's the end of verse 1. You see, oftentimes, and this is where I think the rubber hits the road on the sacrifice idea, is we show up here and I can put on a little nicer clothes. I can clean up my mouth for a little bit. I can clean up my attitude. I can make my anger go away. I can make my desires go away. I can do away. I can seem godly right here. It's easy to be godly in this place, is it not? Boy, there's crosses everywhere. There's water up here to be baptized. I got other people around me. It's easy to be godly here. But how easy is it to be godly when you're walking the line at GE or at Ford? How easy is it to be godly when you're driving the school bus with all those little kiddos in the back, hooping and hollering? How easy is it to be godly when life really happens? And so what Paul says is that your worship is not just a here thing. We show up here for an encouragement. We show up here to be reminded of the things that we can and should be doing. We show up here to bring back together and to realize that we're not alone in this, that there are other people who are in this journey together. I am here today to remind you, and you are here today to remind me. We are here to remind each other. Worship happens every part of our life. We step out of these doors, it doesn't mean that worship is stopped. Matter of fact, when you go next door to meet your neighbor, when you are walking through your neighborhood, when you're at work, when you're doing the things you should be doing, Paul's comment is that you are to sacrifice yourself. Everything about you no longer should exist as it was. It should all be focused on, is this glorifying God? And if it's not, what should you do? Change. Cut it out. If there is something in your life that you say, you know what? I don't think this is really all that God, I'm giving it all back to God. Cut it out. Stop it. Do something to change. Now, before I get all into this, you need to change your life attitude idea. Let's move to verse 2. Because there's more than just changing the outward self. Matter of fact, I think that there's what's the people called where they whip themselves? Y'all know it starts with an A, doesn't it? Ascetics, is that the word? They believe in physical discipline. When I do wrong, I'm going to discipline myself so that way I can beat the wrong out of me. There was the guy in one of those movies that he did. Those Dan Brown movies. Anyways, doesn't matter. Verse 2. If you're like me, and at this point, by the way, in this point I have realized, man, there's things in my life that I haven't fully given to God. There are things in my life that I just didn't even realize, that I haven't even asked the question, are these things for God? Are they glorifying God? Are they encouraging my life in God? There are things I'm realizing that I need to change. So I'm here with you. But then I read verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. Oh man, Josh, you know how easy it is to be conformed to this world? When you surround yourself with water cooler talk, which you don't have water coolers much anymore, so I don't know why I keep saying that. You know what I'm saying. When you surround yourself with folks in the break room who are talking a certain way, and you start to pick it up, because guess what? It tends to happen. Have I been conformed to the world? When I'm at school and my buddies are saying certain things, talking certain ways, using certain language, when they're doing the things and I begin to do them too, am I being conformed to the world? In our home, we've spent a lot of time recently talking about TV shows and saying, man, what TV shows are we really allowing our kids to watch and that they need to change? Or maybe I need to change. That I need to say, you know what? I need to cut some of this stuff out. Because when I put trash into my mind, what happens? Trash comes out. If I put trash in my body, I can only expect trash to come out. And so Paul says the same thing. He says, do not be conformed to the world. There are times you can't avoid it. There are times when you have to be around people, when you have to be around folks who are not of the same caliber or have the same desires as you. Paul's not saying you need to recluse yourself from the world. He says you're a living sacrifice, so you got to be out there. But do not conform to the world. You should not look like everybody else. And he says that you change the way you act by changing what? Changing your mind. Transformed by the renewal of your mind. Have you ever tried to change your thinking? For those of you who've tried to change your thinking, what have you found? What have you learned? What have you discovered? It likes to stay where it was. Anyone else agree with Mike? I got a couple of yeses. What else have you learned? Changing your thinking. It's tough. It's difficult. Anyone agree with Laura? Okay. Who else? Maybe I was wrong. Anyone agree with Ashley? Changing your thinking is not easy. In Christianity, we often get pegged, and probably rightly so in some ways, as focusing so much on how you act. And don't get me wrong, the way you act is important. But Paul doesn't care right now about the way you act. What's Paul concerned about? He's concerned about the inside. That there's a word there, to be transformed by the renewal of your mind. The word transformed is the same word we get the idea of metamorphosis. You know what metamorphosis is? Like a butterfly. Yeah. You know, a little grub. I don't know what they're called. What are they called? Beetle, bug, whatever. Caterpillar, that thing. A little caterpillar hangs upside down from a tree branch. I don't know what he does. Yeah, bless my heart. Circles himself up. Oh, did you not? Oh, I really am smart. I thought you said bless my heart. I thought, boy, my loving wife over there, both apply. A little caterpillar hangs upside down from a stick, and I don't know how long, but then he comes out not a caterpillar. He comes out a butterfly. The idea that I want you to take away is that a life change that occurs in you is not a life change of where you say, okay, today I'm going to stop cussing. And you're going to say, okay, I'm just going to do it. And then hope that all of a sudden it's going to change up here. No, I'm going to encourage you to stop cussing if that's a problem. But I'm going to encourage you to actually stop the thinking first. And if you can start feeding yourself more positive things, more wholesome things, more good things, then naturally, if I'm not around or not exposing myself to things that are bad, are poor, naturally I'm going to start speaking better. And the reason I say this is when we say metamorphosis, you could slap wings on a caterpillar and it doesn't make it a butterfly. It just makes it a caterpillar with wings. There is something that has changed for a caterpillar to become a butterfly. And it is revolutionary change. It is transformational change. It is change from the inside going out. Spirituality works that way. You can't whip yourself into shape as a Christian. It's not going to happen. You have to put positive things into your mind, wholesome things into your life. You have to start being the person who surrounds yourself with good things and to renew your mind. That by testing, you will discern what the will of God is, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. Friends, that last part is the segue into what we'll get into in the later verses, so I don't want to cover it yet. We learn what the will of God is in the coming verses. So here's my cliffhanger for next week's lesson, actually the next couple of weeks, is have you ever asked yourself, what is the will of God for my life? Well, I've asked that for myself multiple times, so if I have, I know you have. Well, guess what? Paul's going to tell us in Romans 12 and 13. He's going to tell you what the will of God is for your life. So come back next week. However, before that, my encouragement for you today, change your thinking. I can't expect you to change your life if the mind is still dirty. If you've still got junk feeding into this, I can't expect you to be a wholehearted individual for God. If you want to be a true disciple of Jesus, you're going to surround yourself with good people. You already made the great first step. You're already here. There's a bunch of good people here. There's some scumbags too, but you know what? We take them all. We love you all. Y'all like that one, didn't you? Y'all don't know what to do with me, do you? Thank you for keeping me. I saw a video the other day, and it was this comment that said, I'll share it with you because I really liked it. It said, people on the outside look at church and they say, it's full of a bunch of hypocrites. You ever heard that phrase? Church is full of a bunch of hypocrites? And he said, so I'm not going to go there. And the guy then said, but that's kind of like going to the gym and saying there's a bunch of fat people here, so I'm not going to go. He said, you go to the gym because you want to be better. You go to the gym because you want to have something improved about yourself. And it doesn't matter if it has worked fully and you're the chiseled six-pack ab, or if you're still, like me, a tub of lard struggling on the elliptical or whatever I'm on, gasping for my breath. It doesn't matter. You're there to be better. Church may have hypocritical people in it, but you're here to be better. You're here to surround yourself with good people. You're here because you have an honest desire and you say, look, I know my life's not right. I'm struggling too. And as I've said in today's sermon, as I have prepared for today's sermon, it has been a kick in the gut for me to say, look, there are things in my life where my thinking still has not been transformed. So I'm walking this journey with you. My question is will you join me on the journey? Will you work with me this week to say, look, God, I want to give. Let's pray right now. God, we want to give. We as a church, we want to give our thinking entirely to you. We want to be that sacrifice and to know that this life is a life that you have blessed in so many ways, that your mercy is just without number. But Father, as we look and examine our own lives, and as we realize there are still parts of us that are worldly, that have not fully been given to you. Father, may your Spirit search us, and may those areas be brought to light. May the light expose the darkness that's within us. Because, Father, our desire is not to be robots for you. Our desire is to be a living, holy, and acceptable sacrifice for you. That we could be your instruments in this world, your people, and not to criticize or complain or condemn, but, Father, to shine your light. That people could see the glory of you in us, and that they will love you because of it. So, Father, as we as a church commit ourselves to that challenge, help us to find the areas that we can change, and help us to make the mind change, to stop feeding ourselves worldly junk and to look for spiritual goodness. Father, for those this morning who, like me, are seeing the areas of their life that need change, Father, be with us as we struggle in those changes. Change is never easy. And Father, oftentimes we've been so conformed to the world that it may not even seem wrong. But Father, I know your Spirit can convict us. May it do so. Father, for those of us here today who say, I don't even know who Jesus is, but I'm interested to know more. May that Spirit continue to grow in them. May they find a love for you that allows them to grow. Father, our prayer ultimately is for our life to be entirely given to you. May that be. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.